Blueprint, Canada's Conservative podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Schmale, Member of Parliament for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock in Ontario. I'm broadcasting from Lindsay, Ontario, as we try to self-isolate and keep our distance during this COVID-19 crisis. And just as a bit of housekeeping, don't forget you need to subscribe, like, share, comment to this program. Help us push back against the always moving Liberal agenda. Now, as of today, according to Canada.ca, there are 10,132 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Canada, more than half of those in the provinces of Ontario and Quebec. So stay safe, everyone. And we're going to talk a bit about that because we have an amazing show lined up for you. We have the leader of Canada's official opposition, the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, the Member of Parliament for Regina Capel, the Honourable Andrew Scheer. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you are super busy these days.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. And I know it's a busy time for everyone here in this country. It's a stressful time as well. So I think this is a great way to keep people informed about what's going on. And thanks very much for having me on the show.
Well, let's talk about something that has just kind of developed this morning after the Prime Minister's press conference, and Premier Doug Ford of Ontario just talked about it and actually confirmed that he will be straightforward with some information. And that information is the modeling numbers, the projections going forward of what it means if we take certain paths in this country and in our provinces. And Doug Ford said that information he is going to release tomorrow. But the Prime Minister, however, during his press conference, brushed it off and basically said Canadians aren't going to know the truth. And what are your thoughts on that, just hearing that?
Yeah, well, it's always concerning when you hear a government say that they're not going to share information with Canadians. We're talking about a health pandemic. We're talking about people who are very concerned for their own well-being, the well-being of their parents, their children. And to have a government say, we don't trust you with the information is never a good thing, no matter what we're talking about. We're looking around the world at other countries. We're looking at countries like New Zealand and the US and European countries share their projections with the public. I think it's critical for a couple of reasons. First of all, as Canadians, we have a right to know. We have a right to know what to expect, kind of mentally to prepare for if we have decisions that we might have to make in our own lives. I believe that we have the right to make those as informed decisions. Secondly, when the government puts modeling out, when the government puts justification for their actions out, then it gets subjected to rigorous public scrutiny, and you can have other experts in the field say, hey, wait a minute, these numbers don't look good, or well, have you thought about this? And you can get that kind of peer review, that critical analysis that can inform better government decisions. We've already seen with this government in the early days, the experts that they were listening to said not to close the border, not to restrict travel coming in from countries that had experienced a spike. Clearly, that was the wrong advice. Clearly, that was something the government had to do a complete 180 on. So when the government makes decisions and it puts the justification for their decisions out there, we can analyze it. We can hold them to account. We can say, have you thought about this? We can get better decisions and better policies if they're open, honest, and transparent.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you talk about this, also, it's the morale of Canadians. They're being asked to do a lot right now, stay away from friends and family members outside of their own household. So I think for many Canadians, just seeing the numbers, seeing where we're at, seeing the best case scenario, the worst case scenario, it allows them to kind of justify what they are going through in their own lives.
Exactly. And, I just think it's sends all kinds of negative signals. It's not the right message to have a government, act in a bit of a patronizing way, pat us on the head and say, you don't need to know, don't worry about it. We can have that information, trust us. Well, okay, we obviously look to our leaders in a time of crisis. We look to our provincial leaders, our federal leaders. But I trust politicians more when they share information, when they're open and accountable.
Well, there is apparently a premier's call tonight. Hopefully that gets ironed out and the leaders start to come together and release some of that information. Now, when we're talking about information, we obviously have to look at what the Communist government of China is doing. And, I don't think there are many people out there that actually believe the numbers coming out of Beijing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was asked yesterday in a news conference whether or not I believed the government of China's numbers and their reporting. And my answer back was, I deal with everything coming out of a communist government, coming out of a government that oppresses its people, that does not allow for freedom of speech, freedom of expression, that outlaws a free and open press. I view everything they say with a great deal of suspicion and skepticism. I'm very concerned about the World Health Organization being pressured into making decisions because of China. We've all seen, I believe most of us have seen the video footage of a WHO, World Health Organization official, get asked directly about whether or not Taiwan would be included in the discussions, in the analysis of what's going on. He pretended that he didn't hear the question, and then when the reporter tried to ask the question again, he just skipped over her and went on to a different one. So when you see things like that, you start to say, hey, look, a health pandemic doesn't respect borders. It doesn't respect different types of systems. It doesn't care about a policy in Beijing. It will move around the world, and it will affect people all the same way. So to see the World Health Organization act like that, again, undermines the credibility of the objectiveness of their statements. So I would like to believe that the people in running the government of China would put politics aside, put communist ideology aside, and be open and honest with countries around the world so we can get a better sense of what's happening there and what risks there are, both to neighboring countries around China and also to countries like Canada that have very dynamic ties, people-to-people ties, business relations, and trade. So we need that openness and honesty from them as well.
And when you speak about open and honesty, even the videos of the physicians who tried to raise awareness of this virus right off the bat, and how they were dismissed, ignored, and eventually, as China went through this, they misled their own people. They misled basically the world as they tried to cover up the numbers of sick and dying people in their country.
Yeah, shocking reports. And again, it's very difficult to get objective information. It's tough to verify reports. The government of China obviously dismisses and denies, but we see the video, we see the smuggled footage out of China that people have bravely posted to blow the whistle on what's going on there. So when you hear reports about doctors who raised the alarm months ago, being persecuted, being fired, in some cases the rumors of detention, being put in being put in jail for speaking the truth. It's tough to confirm those reports, but when you see a government going to great lengths to suppress the truth and prevent open and honest dialogue about it, then obviously my suspicions are raised, and probably the suspicions of most Canadians as well.
Well, I don't, we don't all have a crystal ball, but do you see an effort to, when we get through this, when life returns back to normal, a complete and thorough review of how this was handled at all levels, right across the world, including at the World Health Organization? Absolutely.
It's critical that we learn from this. I've heard many people say this is a once in 100-year type of event. We all hope that's true. We all hope that we don't have to go through this multiple times in our lifetimes. But if it does, we have to be ready. And we have departments, we have government agencies that are tasked with having emergency plans, having perhaps not 100,000 ventilators on standby, perhaps not millions and millions of pieces of equipment that could potentially expire, but at least a plan how to quickly ramp up production, how to quickly go out and procure those types of things. For those of us that have worked in various industries, we know if you work at a factory, there's a plan in case there's a fire. You go and you pull it out and you start implementing step by steps. Well, we were all led to believe that existed, that happened. And looking back from day one, there hasn't been a clear and consistent reaction to this pandemic. The government has been changing policies regularly. Even the advice from experts, from officials, have changed. So clearly, there's a need to go back and review the plan, hold those accountable who are tasked with maintaining it and getting us ready in case this happens, so that next time, not to score political points, not to try to grab headlines, but to say, okay, lessons learned. We can't ever let this happen again. These are the early warning signs that we have to pay attention to, so that next time something like this happens, we'll be in a better position to get out in front of it.
So do you think there are countries right around the world that are rethinking their relationship with China because of this, and including us here in Canada, especially with our manufacturing sector? As you mentioned, we over the years changed the way manufacturing is done. A lot of it is outsourced to China, causing us to rely on them for certain medications and equipment. Do you think this changes the conversation now?
Well, I believe that many countries were rethinking their relationship with China many years ago, before this pandemic. You'll know that our own Conservative caucus was very critical of Justin Trudeau for going to China seeking a free trade deal in the early stages of a very difficult situation with our largest trading partner in the U.S., and dealing with a country that does not have a free and open economy, that doesn't have free market conditions, that doesn't have the same securities legislation and reporting requirements. Having a free trade deal with a company that has basically a captive labor force and many state-owned enterprises has had many negative effects on Canada and other countries around the world. We've got lots of concerns around Huawei and the government of China using a telecoms company to further their foreign policy objective. But now what you're talking about, I do believe, is bringing a whole new factor to light, and that is what about the national security elements of our supply chain? What about the fact that in the middle of a pandemic, many aspects of our production lines to everything from making masks to hospital equipment passes through China? Many of the components might be sourced from China. The assembly might be in China. In fact, it may be, in many cases, almost all of the components are made in China and put together here. So I do believe it's time to have a conversation about that and say, okay, we believe in free and open trade, and if countries can find a cheaper, more efficient way of making a product and find countries that they can do that in, fine. But what about that national security lens to say, well, we need to have some kind of capacity here at home for when a crisis when a crisis hits, that we have some capacity domestically to deal with it.
Well, I think that goes to your point of that's why we need a domestic environment that allows private sector growth to succeed and compete, I think is the key as well. Andrew Scheer, leader of Canada's official opposition, broadcasting from Regina. I just want to talk about some of the stuff we're doing domestically here. The federal government's announcing a whole slew of programs to help Canadians get through, and the opposition of all parties have given the government some leeway in this and some runway to do what they think is best. However, the latest announcement regarding the wage subsidy for small businesses coming under fire by the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and other organizations. Basically, this one headline here came out just a few moments ago. Trudeau's attempt to help small businesses may actually kill them. And I think most of the focus is on the fact that there is a lot of bureaucratic paperwork involved, as well as it takes 6 weeks to potentially get any money. And these small businesses need help now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And 6 weeks. One of our colleagues, Dan Elvis, put it best. It's 6 weeks is 3 pay periods for most people. And for those people who are facing mortgage payments, who are facing rent payment, yesterday was the first of the month, and many people were probably struggling to make that rent payment. And so to tell businesses that are still operating, that still have some kind of an operation going on, some kind of a customer base, for example, an auto repair place that still open, still providing services, but probably experiencing a drastic reduction in customers. For them, one of the key components, so the time lag is huge. To tell companies that they have to wait up to 6 weeks to be able to take advantage of this program means that a lot of the employees won't be able to have their jobs protected. Many jobs will be lost just in that delay. So we're going to be pushing the government to move that up very, very quickly. There are other examples where there can be kind of an instantaneous turnaround. And my message to Bill Morneau will be, it would be a lot better if they developed a simple process with rules for eligibility, but that got the money out the door quickly, and allow the government to do the processing on the back end. And if there is a problem with the company, perhaps not being eligible the way they've designed, they can always go back to that company and address that. But I think in this critical period, it's important to get that money out the door. The second thing is it requires the businesses to pay the wages up front and then qualify for the subsidy on the back end. That's early indications. We're scrutinizing their announcement. And of course, it's difficult because the government doesn't have all the details ready for us. But the early indications are that companies will have to pay their wages up first and then apply for the subsidy. That will be a big challenge for many companies that don't have that cash flow, that have since the beginning of March seen their customer base dry up. So what are they going to pay those wages with if they don't have cash up front? So that's another design flaw that will exclude a lot of companies, a lot of businesses from being able to take advantage of that to keep people working. And that's the objective in all this, is to keep people working for as long as possible, as many jobs that we can protect as possible. It's not going to work if a huge swath of the economy isn't even eligible for the program.
Yes, absolutely. I think also retaining that connection with the essential services, allowing them to, you're right, stay open, allow the employees to stay connected to their business. But the situation is dire. There's no doubt about that. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business says about a third of businesses have partially shut down and a third have fully shut down. So this situation is real.
Yeah, it is. And I'm sure you hear stories from your own riding. My office is open, providing services to the people of Regina Capel. We're respecting all the health guidelines about how to do that, but we are hearing daily from all kinds of small business owners who are desperately trying to keep their doors open, trying to keep their staff retained. Obviously, the service sector probably hit hard, the hospitality sector, probably hit the hardest when you've got restaurants that just aren't allowed to be open and don't really have a mechanism to do drive-through or delivery. There's a lot of hardship out there, which is why, for our part as the official opposition, we have been trying to find that common ground with the government, trying to say, okay, look, there will be debates that we can have at a later date about what the government did right or wrong leading up to this. But for now, we need to make sure these programs are actually helping the people that are going through such a great deal of anxiety.
Yeah, that you raise a good point. These programs are being put together rather quickly, but that's where our parliamentary democracy comes into effect, where we're able to, as opposition members, give suggestions to the government so that they can improve it as we kind of pivot through this crisis.
Yeah, exactly. And we've shown leading up to this that when the House of Commons needs to be there to pass legislation to give the government the scope it needs to react to these challenges, that we've been very cooperative. We were very disappointed last week when we were summoned back to Ottawa to allow the government to bring in some of these measures. And then in addition to the financial assistance package, they put in all kinds of provisions to basically sideline Parliament and eliminate the need for the House of Commons to do its job. You and I, when we're in the chamber, when we're asking questions, the nature of our parliamentary democracy brings out the best in governments, and it forces the government to up its game, to really get things right. We're dealing in real time with such big issues. We can't afford to have to go back and have do-overs and have mulligans, which it looks like next week we're going to be recalled to fix the problems that the government didn't have, fix the problems the government made in their original legislation. They asked for a very, very quick timeline to get that legislation through. We insisted on having some kind of a committee scrutiny of that. It looks like we probably should have had more scrutiny, because if they had told us what they were intending to do with their legislation, our Shadow Minister of Finance, Pierre Poilievre, could have quickly flagged, say, hey, that's not in the bill. If you want to do what you're saying you want to do, you need to add a clause. You need to fix this now. We could have done it instead of having to wait a week and then be recalled to fix it.
Well, as we talk about aid that is being distributed by the federal government and programs being created very quickly to deal with this crisis, there is stimulus available in terms of private sector dollars that could be approved very quickly, and activity could start up in a very safe manner that could help without running more on the credit card, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Well, as conservatives, we always believe that the best way to stimulate the economy is often just for the government to get out of the way. Obviously, there are some big infrastructure projects that can have huge positive effects on economies when we're talking about expanding ports, when we're talking about twinning highways or building a new bridge to make the flow of goods and services more seamless. Those are some things the government can do. But in many areas, it's just a question of having the government eliminate red tape and stop choking the free market. And one of the areas that we've identified is we all know energy prices are low right now because of the downturn in the economy and other factors as well. But we have every reason to believe that there will be a rebound when this health crisis is over. And there are billions of dollars worth of private sector investments waiting for government approval. We're talking literally waiting for a cabinet minister to make a decision. We're talking about projects that have already gone through the environmental review process, the projects that have already gone through feasibility studies, that have already done the duty to consult with First Nations communities, and they're just waiting for a political decision. And so what we're saying to the government is two things. One, just make a decision on those projects. If it ticks all the boxes, if it meets all the standards, approve the projects. Let the private sector say, okay, we're going to build this. We're going to build this project because we have confidence that in a few months we're going to see that rebound, and we want to get the work done now. That'll keep people working. In addition, we're calling for a one project, one review mechanism. This is something Conservatives have implemented in the past. Liberals are very good at adding layers of red tape, but it makes no sense to have, for example, an environmental engineering company go out and do an audit and an examination and an evaluation for the provincial government, then have that same individual, this happens in many provinces and many regions, that same company get a virtually identical contract to do the same exact evaluation for the federal government. We're saying, let's have some integration of standards and regulations between provincial and federal governments. Let's have one environmental review so we don't make companies go through the exact same hoops a second time. That just adds to the delay and to the costs of projects.
Well, I think this also plays into the whole certainty aspect. As you said, some of these decisions are just waiting for a minister to make a decision. And after we get through all of this, as companies in all sectors look for those valuable investment dollars, we still want that to come to Canada. And with the still that certainty problem in a number of sectors, it gets harder to restart our economy as quickly as many would like.
Yeah, exactly. And when the health part of this pandemic is over, and rightly so, right now governments are focusing on keeping people healthy. We're starting to hear more and more tragic stories of some, obviously, many elderly patients of COVID-19, often succumbing to this disease, cut off from family and friends because it's so contagious. That's heartbreaking when you hear those stories of people not being able to visit their elderly parents or grandparents because of the disease. We're also hearing reports of younger people as well, falling victim to this. So rightly, the focus right now is on keeping people healthy and safe and dealing with this on a healthcare level. But it's not too early to start thinking about how to come out of this on the economic side as well. And when the health part of this is over, when the disease has kind of peaked and ebbed and our healthcare system has been able to manage it, we're going to be competing with other countries around the world to kickstart our economy. And when investors are saying, okay, we're ready to put our money back in the economy, we're ready to start backing projects and proposals, Canada is going to be up against obviously the United States, our trading partners in Europe and Asia, and we have to have a competitive edge. We have to send those signals that, hey, come make your investment here in Canada because we are ready to grow again. We are open for business. If the government is sitting on billions of dollars worth of decisions from a year ago or from 6 months ago that they haven't made a decision on, that's not going to send a very clear signal of confidence to the investment community when they're picking which country to bet on as we come out of this downturn.
Now, as you mentioned, we want to be competitive as we come out of this downturn and this health crisis. A number of Canadians, although rightfully, as you mentioned, focusing on the health aspect, some may have not noticed that there was a tax increase on April 1st. And that, of course, is the carbon tax going up by about $10 a ton. So at a time where people are struggling, businesses are hurting, when the government's trying to get hundreds of billion dollars out the door to relieve some of this pressure, this financial pressure on Canadians, there's a tax increase. I don't see the logical sense in all of this.
Well, there's no logical sense. There's no logical sense for the carbon tax, period, before this pandemic. We knew it was ineffective. We pointed out to the government that emissions are rising under their plan, and they're just adding to the cost of living for millions of Canadians. The logic of taking more money out of the economy during a health crisis that has led to a catastrophic drop in economic activity makes absolutely no sense. I went out yesterday and I called on the government to scrap the increase at the very least. We don't believe in the carbon tax at all, but at the very least they could suspend the escalation of it this year. For heaven's sake, if you buy their logic, at least we could point to the fact that there's been a dramatic reduction in greenhouse gas emissions because of the downturn in the economy. There would be a justification to suspend a policy. The fact that it doesn't work in the first place is more reason. The fact that it takes billions of dollars out of the economy is even more reason during a time when we need to be keeping as much money in the free market economy as we possibly can. Every time the government takes money out of that, it becomes a huge drag on economic growth. And so I don't think they're going to listen to us. They're ideologically committed to us and it's one of the frustrating things to see a government so beholden to their radical ideology that they're not willing to be flexible in a time of a crisis. I think is sending a very bad signal to Canadians.
Well, as you said many times, the way we're going to get out of this is through technology and innovation. But at the other time, the essence of the carbon tax, with the lack of options for the vast majority of Canadians and affordable options, is that this tax punishes them, especially in rural communities. So at the end of the day, you're not actually spurring innovation as rapidly it could in a free market system. You're just empowering government to pick winners and losers in the marketplace.
100%. When a jurisdiction has a carbon tax, what it does is it drives away jobs and investments. So, there are countries around the world that have said, "Oh, well, look, we've reduced our greenhouse gas emissions." Well, they've also dramatically reduced their manufacturing capability. They've dramatically reduced their value-added processing. Those jobs and investments go overseas. Their population consumes just as much. It's just that now they're sending their consumer dollars to countries like China and more countries like the United States that don't have a carbon tax. So I've never understood how we're better off on a planet when we move production out of Canada, a country that has some of the strictest environmental standards in the world, labor legislation that respects the rights of workers, partnership agreements with Indigenous communities to make sure they benefit from our natural resource sector. I've never seen the logic in driving away that investment, watching a factory get shut down in Ontario, only to basically open up in China to take advantage of some of the laxest environmental regulations in the world, a country that has no rights for workers, that has no the working conditions that we would not put up with here in Canada. So we see those jobs go overseas to countries like China. We then have to buy those finished products back with our consumer dollar. It makes no sense. I'd rather have that production made here in Canada, subjected to those higher standards, have the profits stay here in Canada, the jobs stay here in Canada, and then incentivize those companies to come up with the types of technological advancements that will solve this problem. That's where the solution will come from. It won't be on punishing the consumers and moms and dads and commuters here in a country where we're responsible for such a small fraction of global greenhouse gas emissions. If we want to really take the climate change fight global, if we really want to have bang for a buck, we would be focusing on investing in the types of technological advancements that will then be adopted by countries that are actually producing most of the CO2 on the planet.
That's well said, Andrew. Any parting shots? I know you're busy and you have to go. So any parting shots?
No, just stay safe, stay healthy. And in this critical stage, it's very important if we do want to get ahead of the curve and make sure that our healthcare system can keep up with the number of cases that are likely to come. It's essential that people take these types of directives seriously. The directives to social distance and to stay in small groups is not because the government likes to tell people how to live their lives. It's literally so that we can slow the pace of the infections and get ahead of this. And so please stay safe, wash your hands regularly, and I know as a country, as a strong nation, we will all get through this.
Thank you very much, Andrew Scheer. I apologize for not having you on the show before. Very sorry about that, but I do appreciate your time. I know you're busy. I didn't want to overwhelm you. But thank you for your time.
You bet. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
Andrew Scheer, Leader of Canada's Official Opposition. He's also the Member of Parliament for Regina Qu'Appelle. Don't forget, please help us spread the message, push back against the Liberal agenda, like the show, comment, share, subscribe. Also, if you're wanting to listen to this on your time now that you're self-isolating, please, you can find it on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, and Castbox, among other platforms. So thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back on Tuesday at our regular time at 1:30 with another episode of The Blueprint. Don't forget, low taxes, less government, more freedom. That's the blueprint. Thanks for joining us.